accident. The last time he was my agent was only a few years ago, which was MC2 in Miami, and I knew he had started it, but I just presumed at this point, to be honest, because of his age and his party lifestyle, that he was either passed away or retired, like many of these guys. And when I found out during the beginning of the new Epstein trial that he was in fact still the partner in MC Miami, which was my main agency, I resigned and I left right away. I didn't really tell them why. I just said that for reasons I can't really, I just can't be with the agency right now. No, of course, since then they had a lawsuit and then they split up and he sold his stake in MC2 with Jeff Fuller, who was the other partner down there, who doesn't necessarily know the dealings of what Jean-Luc really does in his free time. But, so they went on and parted ways. And that was just a couple years ago. So that's how long he's been haunting my life, and worse is that in between all that is many things that have happened, many incidences with him. He's groped me over the years and attempted things. And as well, he's the guy who took me as a gift to Harvey Weinstein.
Oh, really?
He essentially, at one point in Miramax in New York, he basically took me aside and said that this was through my agency. He was always in the agency because he was an investor. So he was always there when he was in town. That's where he was. He was hanging out. And I knew who he was, obviously, at this point, and I knew all the stories about him. I wish, girls, all kinds of girls would talk about him. And I'd heard about the 60 Minutes thing, but, back then you couldn't re-see something like that. And he said that basically, because he was my agent and that was my world, although I knew these stories about him, there wasn't anything I could really do. It never occurred to me I could maybe go to the police or something for things. But, these men were so powerful, you wouldn't have dared.
Yeah, it seems like even, since by the way, I've had two guests and friends of mine, just like yourself, who were connected to Weinstein. It's just amazing how that guy got around.
Interesting.
Yeah, right, but what do you call I forgot what I was going to say there.
About Jean-Luc in the agency?
No, wait a second. It's such a serious allegation, a rape,
Right.
And even when I've tried to do shows about the modeling business before and contacted even people who wrote books, and you'd think they'd want to promote that book. But, it seems like people are getting paid off not to talk.
Right. I think people are just really afraid, possibly, is more. Even, because... even myself, anyone and everyone I've asked to speak about it. I have personal friends that have been drugged and raped by Jean-Luc and other worse scenarios with Trump and other things. Mm. And they were just absolutely terrified. Terrified of also of even just potential lawsuits against them. Their parents, they are, a lot of the girls, that I never realized, to be honest, I went into counseling during COVID because I didn't really realize, the trials of Epstein and stuff and the whole Jean-Luc thing brought up a lot of anxiety for me and almost like an obsessive researching of me trying to track him because I wanted more than anything to see Jean-Luc pay. And he was still alive and still operating in Paris and right out in broad daylight. And his victims and we chatted and others that I've spoken to and I've tried to get to talk who won't talk. And, everyone else, a lot of people just are like lackadaisical and I think they're partially shamed because they participated so long. And one of the things I realized during counseling was that, one, that I was a victim, even though I never knew that, ironically, because even though it was groping and sexual harassment, I never thought of it as that because I hadn't been raped and I had managed to avoid being raped, and because of just sheer luck, to be honest, because I was in all the same positions, but I was alerted of him. And so,
that's interesting. You say that you didn't see yourself as a victim because, these are the kind of lawsuits that I do, and so often, and sometimes it's just so damn clear cut, like I have this one survivor right now. She has a huge case, but all she keeps saying is, "Well, I don't see myself as a victim." I guess you don't wanna,
right?
You know what I mean? Because that's another loss, It's so in your head, all this stuff. But I got a couple of questions for you. And I got a couple of questions for you. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah.
Couple questions.
It's so common, too, to be in this world. It was daily, so it seems so normal.
Right. Now, Jean-Luc Brunel, he would visit Jeffrey Epstein when Jeffrey Epstein was being held at that hotel jail at the sheriff's down there, where he was allowed to leave during the day. Jean-Luc Brunel visited him more times than there were visiting days. So either he was allowed there on a day where there wasn't a visit scheduled, or he went visited twice in one day. Who knows? Now, why would he be visiting so much? Were they still trafficking in the trafficking business partnerships during that period of time?
I mean, I'm sure. I mean, that's my personal opinion. But the thing is that I see Epstein was a client of Jean-Luc. You know, Jean-Luc is really the linchpin in this 40-year saga of trafficking teen girls around the world. And as far, I mean, obviously trafficking happens all over the world all the time, but on this kind of a level, I don't think it's ever happened until him. And he did it for 40 years. And I think that Epstein, you know, obviously started out as one of Jean-Luc's clients, and then it morphed into some sort of symbiotic business type relationship between them, where I think Epstein must have had those bigger other connections globally, whereas Jean-Luc was incredibly established among very powerful people in Europe and in Paris, and had been long supplying them there. But when he met with Epstein and they began working to, I think it just expanded, and obviously that must be how Jean-Luc came to New York. And I know that Epstein was his investor and gave him, you know, about $1 million to do that, or $1 million line of credit, as they say. And, you know, I was right there in New York when Karen's New York opened. I know many models that were with Karen's New York. And he invited me to go with Karen's New York. He tried to pinch me from, it was, I believe, Next Model. And he was an investor at Next Models as well. And supposedly from what I've read, because, you know, at the time I didn't really know what their business was, but supposedly he and his brother were co-founders of Next New York, which was with Faith Cates, this woman. And I don't know, you know, the details on that, but that is prior to his business dealings with Epstein and Karen Models New York. But obviously they all knew each other, and that's how, you know, that came about. I forgot the original question.
Well, let me ask you a question now. My understanding is that Brunel had the access. He was the expert with the visas.
Yes. I mean, they all did it, but nobody's done it as much as I saw Jean-Luc doing it. But they all did it. The ones that were internationally focused, it was so easy to do the visas. I watched them do it in the office. I've seen Jean-Luc doing it in the office because, you know, when you're modeling and you're going on castings all day and you're between castings, and if you've got an hour or two to kill and you've got nowhere else to go and you're near your agency, well, then you would just go to your agency and hang out. And on top of it, you know, you're kind of right in their face. You're fresh in their mind. They might take a shine to you. A job might pop up and you're the one sitting in front of them. You know, and they can have the power to push you to clients and things like that. So, you know, you'd be in the agency, and I was very interested in photography and Photoshop, which was relatively, you know, new. And I, you know, which is what I later went into, is photography and, you know, all of that. And so I would sit there for hours and watch them. They had in-house graphics people that would be doing, you know, whatever they wanted. And I would watch them doctor up and make fake editorial tear sheets. And I sat there asking, like, well, what are you doing? How are you know, I'm very inquisitive, and I was very interested. Yeah, and they'd sit there and they'd tell me what they were doing. We'd sit around giggling and watching as they created fake tear sheets. And then I even saw
in order to qualify for the visas.
Exactly. And I watched them even filling out the visa paperwork, submitting the documents. I remember one of them specifically telling me how many you had to have in order to get that H-1 visa. And I don't remember if it was 12 or 20 tear sheets. You know, when you're talking about a teenage girl from Latvia or whatever, they don't have tear sheets. They can't get tear sheets because they're too young and they just haven't been in the industry long enough. And Latvia doesn't have that many magazines, because in order to qualify from wherever you're from, your home country or whatever that is, you would have to have proven that you are a substantially, you know, established working talent, model or whatever, sports, and you've been written up because of it in so many magazines. And so that's what you're basing it on. And so they would show all these published editorials, supposedly, that shows how, you know, established they are, but none of them were.
You know something? This is fascinating. I've never heard this explained to me this way before. I was told that Mr. Trump, the majority of his H-1 visa applications was of all his businesses, the golf courses, bringing in Irish construction workers, all this other stuff, because he does import a lot of foreign workers, but that the majority of his H-1 visa applications was for Trump modeling agency. Okay?
Of course.
And now that we know, this is a systemic visa fraud, okay, trafficking children, that this is government documents, it's available to be researched. And you want to know something else? I brought this up once before, and I was shot down about this as part of a litigation we were working on, that I specifically said, this is where we need to be looking into. So it's very interesting that you shared this with me, Heather. Our guest today, Heather Braden, you could find her at her website, heatherbraden.com, and also on Twitter or Instagram at Heather Braden, or sometimes it's Heather J. Braden. So you can try both until you'll find her. She's going to be the prettiest one, so it's easy to find, right? You can find that easy, Heather Braden. So I left the audience with a little teaser about Steve Mnuchin. What do you know about Steve Mnuchin? His name shows up on some paperwork. He says, oh, my goodness, I can't imagine why. What do you know?
I mean, I was with Next Models, and he was listed as, on there as their official state point of contact for Next Management Corporation. Now, when you fill out that paperwork, first of all, as a business, as Faith Cates would have, or whoever it was at the time, you don't just randomly pick some random number by accident. Now, granted, they've been longtime friends, so, obviously at some point, she asked him to be that person, clearly. And any other story around it is ridiculous, because who would just accidentally put somebody's information? And ironically, I believe the address that was used for that point of contact was the office for Next at the time. And I was with Next Models at that time. I was with them. He was there frequently. I saw him frequently at the office. To me, and I remembered him only from his face, because I remember thinking he was this weaselly, creepy, leering guy, right, who was often at the dinner parties, the model parties. He was one of what I considered to be what we call the model blanks, the F word. We call them the model F'ers. Right. That was their known word in the industry. If you ask anyone in the industry what is a model F'er, they'll all tell you it's one of these creepy, usually powerful or rich guys hanging around the teen girls at the model parties. And so, he was there. I've seen him many, many times. He was around the agency all the time. He was just a fixture. Obviously, he wasn't there every day, day to day, because I don't think he actually worked there. But he was definitely there. And supposedly, Next Management was supposedly formed in '88, from what I read. And I'm not sure the exact dates, but that was just before I got to New York. But and supposedly it was by the brothers, Jean-Luc Brunell and Arnaud Brunell. So I'm sure, at that time, Jean-Luc had already been part of the 60 Minutes episode. So obviously Faith Cates knew this, because she was in the modeling industry in New York, and everyone in the modeling industry in New York knew this. It was a big, humongous deal that Eileen Ford was in 60 Minutes, which was, of course, like the biggest news show at the time, because she'd been sending girls to this guy who was a known predator, who'd been accused by multiple girls of drugging and raping at least 3 girls. And so when Faith Cates decided, basically, that she didn't give a flying F, excuse my language, and decided she doesn't care what they said. She's going to take this guy who has this reputation, she's going to partner with him and create a new agency. So she had no problem doing that. If she had no problem doing that, well, then what would give her any problem lying about her relationship and history of this, what's his name?
Steve Mnuchin.
The Treasury.
Yeah, Steve Mnuchin. Now, have you looked into his wife? Because his wife, he definitely married up. Okay, he married out of his league, even for a rich guy. Okay, have you looked into her?
I'm sure. Who knows? I might even know her. I'm sure. Yeah. He's got two ex-wives. There's this one girl, Heather Forrest Crosby. It looks like, I don't know who she is. It says that she was an entrepreneur. And then the Louise Linton. It doesn't surprise me, of course, the opportunistic moves of people goes both ways. And I don't blame anyone for marrying up. I'm not from the highest class of family, although my English family and my both ancestors all were very successful, and even in fashion and arts and things. But, I can't blame anyone for necessarily marrying up. But it's definitely something that was probably introduced through this world, because I doubt he would have had direct contact with a Scottish actress of